Good evening, everybody. The Yom HaShoah commemoration will begin at 7:30, but before then, we'll be screening a number of messages for the occasion that we have received from religious and other leaders.
The story of the Jewish people is one of struggle. Sometimes the struggle is with outsiders who mean us harm. Sometimes the struggle is with each other. Indeed, the very name of our people suggests a struggle. Israel, Yisrael, means one who has struggled with God. But what defines the Jewish people is what we do next. For incredible Holocaust survivors, it was rebuilding their families and building up the state of Israel. For us today, it means fighting the worrying rise in anti-Semitism. The 11th century commentator Rashi defined Yisrael not as struggling, but as prevailing. By combating prejudice, wherever we see it, we too will prevail.
On Yom HaShoah, we pause to remember the horrors of the Holocaust. We urge each other to remember never to forget the atrocities so that they may never happen again. This year, perhaps more than any other year, we are keenly aware of our shared humanity. We all isolate in our homes in order to protect ourselves and others from a virus that does not differentiate between race and ethnicity, but that is dangerous to us simply because we are human beings. We must remember our shared humanity, not only in times of protecting and defending against the virus, but as we emerge from this isolation, and we will, please God, to build a world of peace, love, and understanding.
Just over a week ago, we sat at the Seder and remembered our ancestors who providentially survived the original Holocaust at the hands of the Egyptians. In that process, our nation was born. We sang V'hisha Amda, reminding ourselves that in every generation, there are those who seek to destroy us. And if not for Hashem's promise to our great-great-grandfather Abraham, heaven forbid, we would have ceased to exist. On Yom HaShoah, we remember the holy souls cruelly taken from us before their time, and we take a moment to reflect. We think about what we lost and what might have been. However, we also salute the survivors, those who lived through the horrors, who came through the other side and started again. We thank you for your inspiration, for everything you've given us and taught us, and we wish you continued blessing and health. Today, we must renew our pledge not to forget those who suffered in the Shoah, for if we do, we will have forgotten who we are.
75 years since the liberation of Belsen and the horror, there's something which speaks beyond it, which even shines through. The courage, the resilience of spirit. The Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, saying, I shall not go down into this silence other than singing, praying, teaching Torah. My father's grandmother, whose last recorded words before she was sent to Auschwitz were, nothing can shake my faith, and who I imagined going to her death thinking of her beloved husband, her children, and her grandchildren, and joining him in the one dimension even the Nazis could not take away from her, the infinite transcendence of God. And the survivors, after all they've been through, which is to us unimaginable, creating new lives of hope and love and contribution to society. Jewish history is a history of the most profound resilience of the human spirit. And that speaks to us beyond the horror, and even now in the incomparable, not so hard as then, but difficult times we have today.
This Yom HaShoah, we are particularly remembering the 75th year of the liberation of Belsen. And this picture is a picture from after the war of the displaced persons camp at Belsen. And here's my dad, who was a British soldier, a sergeant, whose job was to arrest Nazis. And he went to the displaced persons camp in Belsen, there with lots and lots of other volunteers. He taught me and the Jewish community in Britain never to forget that it is our duty to work so that Judaism flourishes. We remember the past, but we also flourish in the present and in the future. So on this Yom HaShoah, I wish us all health. I wish us strong memory, but also to think about flourishing in the future, because that's what those children and adults in Belsen have taught us, to remember and also to flourish.
75 years ago, people were dancing in the streets for VE, for Victory in Europe Day, to mark the end of the Second World War. Only gradually did it dawn that as well as the military and civilian casualties of the war, the Jewish community had lost 6 million murdered by the Nazi Germans. As a child, I went to Birmingham Hebrew School, and I do not recall the horrors of the Shoah being discussed or taught then, or really for decades that followed. But now, even now, new facts and stories are revealed. And 75 years later, we face those who try to deny that the Shoah ever happened. And so it is our duty to keep alive the truth as we give witness to the memory of the Jews and the Jewish communities who were destroyed.
Hello. Today, Yom HaShoah, we are marking the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. And it's a time, of course, that we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who perished at the hands of the Nazis. It's also a time, of course, we remember the stories of the survivors, because in them sharing their stories, it actually teaches us the evils of intolerance and, of course, the virtue of tolerance. And here in Birmingham, we have a relatively small Jewish community. But earlier this year, I was able to meet one of those survivors at the Singers Hill Synagogue here in the city centre. And it was Mindu Hornick, a wonderful woman who has actually got her own story to tell. Because when she was just 12 years old, she was taken to Auschwitz with her sister, her mother, and brothers. And very sadly, it was only her and her sister who survived. And Mindu told us her story through a film that she put together of returning to Auschwitz. And I know I speak for everyone who was there on the day of that film to say it was an incredibly moving experience. But most importantly, she continues to fight the good fight, to tell the story of why tolerance and care and respect for every community, whether it be anti-Semitism or any other form of hatred, must be beaten. So it's my honour to come together and remember the principle that we're all fighting for. Thank you very much.
Earlier this year, I convened Greater Manchester's second Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration, and it gave me what I consider to be one of the greatest privileges of my life, and that was to spend a couple of hours sitting next to, chatting to, and listening to Ike Alterman, an Auschwitz survivor and also somebody who survived the Death March. On this Yom HaShoah, I have cause to think back to Ike's speech, powerful, emotional, and with more than a sprinkling of dry Mancunian wit, as he described things that are the most horrific that anyone can imagine, but also the joy of arriving at Windermere at the end of the war, the paradise of Windermere, as he described it, and the kindness of the British people who met him there. We live in hope that the world will never see a repeat of the horrors that Ike and his generation witnessed.
Friends, I want to thank all those who sent us those moving and meaningful messages. But there is one more before we begin the commemoration proper. The very first engagement that the then newly elected Mayor of London undertook only 3 days after his election, was to attend the Yom HaShoah event at the Koptel Stadium in 2016. He participated in the pledge we then made to come together each year to mark Yom HaShoah, and he has honored that pledge by joining us each year since then. We are in turn honored by his virtual presence here today, and I now invite you to listen to his message.
As Mayor, attending the Yom HaShoah commemoration event is something I'm proud to do every year in normal times. And it's with great regret that we can't all come together in person today. But even though we're physically separated, we can still take this moment to remember together these 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were killed in the Holocaust, alongside so many other innocent people. Earlier this year, I visited Auschwitz to mark the 75th anniversary of its liberation. I'd been before some years ago, but the extent of the suffering that occurred there hit me again in such a profound way. It reminded me of why it's so important that we ensure we never forget those who were killed, and that we never forget where prejudice, racism, and hatred can lead if it's allowed to fester unchecked and unchallenged. This feels more important than ever before. As we confront the depressing reality that hatred, anti-Semitism, and nativist populism is on the rise once again around the world. The theme of this year's ceremony is Remember Together, We Are One. And as one, we must continue with our mission to teach the next generation the vital lessons of the past. As one, we must continue to defeat those who seek to divide us. And as one, we must continue to stamp out anti-Semitism wherever we find it. I'm confident we can do this together. And I want to finish with a message of optimism, because although there are many stories from the Holocaust that demonstrate the very worst of what humans can do, there are also many stories of extraordinary kindness, human resilience, and heroism during the darkest of times. And this is something that should give us all hope and be a ray of light during this difficult time for our country and the whole world. Thank you.